I didn't notice the dress at first. I noticed the silence of my phone, the kind that usually means peace, and then a little vibration that felt like a tap on my shoulder. I was at my desk in the art room, scraping dried tempera off a palette, thinking about how the kids had made sunsets look like spilled sherbet, when the bank sent a message with the kind of calm words that make your stomach roll. Purchase approved. I stared at the screen, waiting for it to undo itself, like a kind friend taking back a careless sentence. And then the second tap came, and the third, and the fourth, and each one was the same boutique, same city, same rush through my credit like a mouthful of water after a run. For just a beat, my brain did that hopeful thing and whispered it had to be a mistake. It wasn't. When I called, the boutique woman spoke in a voice you could butter toast with. Yes, she said. She had the card on file. Yes, she had been told it was fine. Yes, the dress was for Lila Vaughn, and wasn't she a delight? I remember blinking at the stapled paper chain of student projects dangling over the window, little suns with googly eyes. In the reflection of the glass, my face looked both too old and too young. My hand shook. I thanked the woman because I was raised for politeness to be the hinge between anger and collapse. And I hung up. Behind my ribs, something made of wire and breath drew itself up and said, quietly but clearly, "This will not stand." I didn't have the entire shape of vengeance yet. I just had the promise of it, a coal going from dark to red. I've been called nice so often it feels like a coat that doesn't quite fit. I'm not nice. I'm patient. There's a difference. I learned patience in the kind of house where rent was a puzzle we solved with the loudest pieces of our lives. I took extra shifts at the bookstore, the kind that smelled like dust and glory. I fought off sleep through college classes with coffee and peppermint gum. I mailed my mother shirts I found on clearance and told her they were gifts for no reason. The first time a bank handed me a small rectangle with my name on it and a line of credit behind it, I held it like it was a thin piece of glass containing a lake. It was never a toy to me. It was a rope. It was a bridge. It was the thing that meant I could take my little brother for a burger when our kitchen offered only stubborn shelves and a bag of rice. It was always rationed against the future. Maybe that's why I said yes to Claire without even asking for the details, when she came racing across the school parking lot with her scarf trailing like a flag and threw her arms around my neck. "Be my maid of honor," she said into my hair. I said yes while laughing because Claire had been my friend since kindergarten, since she shared her pudding when mine had fallen to the floor and burst like a soft grenade. We were different, but braided together by 1,000 little things. She was the kind who always remembered birthdays. I was the kind who brought an extra granola bar because she always forgot lunch. The wedding was set in Cleveland in late summer, all soft heat and lake breezes, with the reception in her aunt's backyard under strings of lights. It sounded like every romantic movie that promises you sweetness without indigestion. The first time I met Lila, my palms still smelled faintly of hot glue. Claire had warned me gently that her cousin could be a lot. What she meant was that Lila walked into rooms like doors were bowing to her. She was the kind of pretty that made people lean in even when she said nothing. She put her sunglasses on top of her head the way some people put on crowns. She hugged me with a press that felt like being measured. "You're the friend," she said. And I wanted to reply, "I'm the maid of honor," but I smiled and said, "Yes, I'm Maya." We went dress shopping on a Saturday soft with rain. The boutique had a bell on the door that chimed politely when we entered, and the air inside smelled like steamed satin and the sharper edge of money. Dresses hung like clouds all in a row, the kind that cause grandmothers to cry and fathers to cough and say, "Yes, yes, of course." Claire, sweet Claire, tried on gowns that made her eyes shine. Lila tried on one after another with little puckers at her mouth when the lace didn't lie flat enough or the silk felt too clingy. She had a way of flicking her gaze over the seamstresses that would have made me want to hide in the stockroom if I'd been them. I was careful. I kept my jokes soft and my suggestions few. I dug my phone out to take pictures. When the conversation curled around the bridal party dresses, the boutique woman gestured with a clipboard and asked for a card to hold the deposit. not to charge anything yet, just to secure sizes because they'd had issues with people disappearing like ghosts. Claire's eyes skittered to me with that blend of apology and hope. I didn't want to look cheap, so I handed mine over with my heart beating the rhythm of a kicked hive, and I said clearly, "Just for the deposit," and she nodded. "Absolutely, of course. We'll call you before any charges." Later, we sat at a cafe that frothed milk like it wanted to be remembered. Lila leaned back and told a story about a man who drove across town to bring her soup when she sneezed. In her version, she was always the sun people orbited, and that day, I let it slide. Every time I opened my wallet, I heard my mother's voice in the background saying money is just a way to breathe easier. And every time I closed it, I told myself it would be fine. The messages from the bank came a week later. The boutique had decided not to call. Or maybe they had decided my number suddenly meant something else. The woman on the phone told me with brisk cheer that they had the authorization, and the dress had been paid in full. The dress, I repeated. For who? For Lila, she said. She seemed surprised I didn't know. In the pause that followed, I could hear the wordless rustle of taffeta in her mind, as if the dresses were snickering. When I called Claire to ask what happened, she was already apologizing before the second ring. "I meant to tell you," she said, breathless. "I thought she'd taken care of it. Lila said she had your okay." I could hear traffic through the phone, the faraway honk of a horn. I could hear the way my heart knocked against my sternum, a slow, angry drum. I said, "She didn't." Claire whispered, "I'm so sorry." And then she said the thing that cracked something small inside me. "Can we not make a big deal? It's just easier with the family." I went quiet in that particular way that convinced men in suits at the bank, later, that I was dangerous in a polite dress. Here is the thing about patient people. We collect moments, we inventory. We may pretend we've dropped the slight, but really we've placed it somewhere safe, where it ripens with time. I said, "Okay, let me think." She kept saying, I'll fix it," like a charm against bad weather. The next few days were a string of micro-cuts. Lila texted me a photo in the mirror of the boutique, her phone blocking half her face, the dress a prism of light, captioned with a heart and a "thank you, babe." At school, a parent dropped by to say her son loved art now, and I hid my shaking hands under the desk. In the grocery store, Claire's aunt, who had never liked me much, cornered me between lettuce and radishes, and said in a syrupy tone that the Vaughns were so generous to include me in everything. It felt like a sentence designed to make me say thank you for snow in winter. On social media, Lila posted a story with the address of the boutique and a tag to me, a neat digital ribbon that tied me to her purchase like I'd been a sponsor for a marathon. People commented with little hearts and clapping hands. My friends texted me, "When did you become a fairy godmother?" I didn't have a good answer. The bank didn't care that I was patient. They cared that the charges were now alive and doing push-ups on my statement. When I explained that authorization had meant something different, the woman's keyboard clacked like a little woodpecker. She said, "We can start a dispute, but it will take time." She said, "You can try to work it out with the merchant." She said many things that felt like raindrops on a window while you stand on the other side without a coat. At the boutique, in person, under lights that made everyone wince at themselves in the mirrors, the manager's smile was a product he could sell. He was very sorry for the confusion, he said, but the card on file had been used as instructed, and now the dress was altered. And alterations are like tattoos, darling. He said darling to me, and I had to remind my jaw how to be still. He used the kind of logic that works on people who have never had to count coins. I told him carefully that I had only permitted a deposit for bridesmaids' dresses, and I had not authorized a descending avalanche of tulle charged to my name. He blinked and said these things happen, and wasn't it lovely that the wedding would be perfect? It was after that I walked to my car, sat with my hands on the steering wheel, and thought about fire. The pivot came not like a thunderclap, but like a glass ringing. I was standing in my kitchen, a small square with one window that looked out on a tree polite enough to turn orange on schedule each fall, when I noticed the email. It was months old, buried under reminders to reset passwords and coupons from a store I kept telling to stop flirting with me. It was from the boutique. The first time they had asked for card authorization in writing. My reply was 3 lines long, the last one saying, "Call me before any charge that isn't the deposit." And then there was a little second email, almost identical, in which the manager thanked me for the deposit authorization for bridesmaid dresses and promised, in that rounded language of customer service, that they would communicate clearly. I don't know why I hadn't seen it, except that life throws grapefruit and sometimes you duck and forget everything else. I called the bank again, and this time I asked to speak to someone who didn't read from a script. The woman who came on sounded tired and kind. I told her the facts, and then I sent her the emails while I was still on the phone, so the proof warmed the conversation as we spoke. She whistled under her breath. "That changes things," she said. She explained how the dispute could be escalated, how certain purchases could be clawed back when the cardholder had been misled, how authorization is a word with edges in banking. She talked about merchants and codes and the square dances of chargebacks, and I wrote it all down in the notebook where I usually planned lesson ideas. Then she said gently, "If you want to push this, you need to push it. You need to tell them what happens next. We'll back you up. I do not believe in cruelty. I do believe in boundaries." I printed the email chain. I printed the statement that showed the charges. I printed the template letter the bank had forwarded me that spelled out, in careful, simple words, that a person who uses another person's credit without permission is supposed to make that person whole. It read like a bedtime story for adults who never learned how money works. I put all of it in an envelope with a new sheet on top. On it I wrote, in a hand my students always said looked like the teacher they wanted me to be, what I had decided. She used my credit for her dress. I sent the bill back. Pay your own. I mailed a copy certified to the boutique. I mailed a copy to the address Lila had on her save the date card, the one with a photograph of her and Ethan wrapped in scarves in the park, all whitened smiles and high boots. I mailed one to Claire because she had the right to know, and I took one to the bridal shower. The shower was at the aunt's house, the place with the porch that always smelled faintly of lemon and expensive candles. The women stood around balancing little plates with neat triangles of cucumber sandwiches. Every third person wore a dress with a bow. The room sounded like the inside of a seashell if it had gossip in it. When I walked in, Claire hugged me so tight I forgot to breathe. Her eyes were gleaming with the kind of happiness that made me forgive her almost entirely. Lila turned in a swish of fabric. She wore a white sundress that didn't try at all and managed to look like everything. She held out her arms to me like she expected me to lay something in them. I handed her the envelope. She laughed at first. People laugh when they don't understand what's in their hands. She slid her finger under the flap and drew out the papers. I watched her mouth shape the words that had shaped me in quiet hours. Her smile trembled, then slid off like something oiled. She said, low and sharp, "What is this?" I said it was the bill. I said the bank had opened a dispute based on the written authorization I'd provided, and until it was resolved, the boutique would be withholding the dress from further fittings, because I had informed them of the challenge, and they had to decide whether to risk a loss or ask for direct payment. I said that if she wished to negotiate with her vendor, that was up to her, but I was no longer the vendor. A hush fell, the kind of hush you get in churches when someone stands up and says something real. A few heads turned, eyes moving back and forth like cats watching something in the yard. The aunt made a little scoffing sound and said I was being dramatic. Claire whispered my name in a question that begged me to back up. My throat felt raw, my palms were damp, and I was not backing up. I said plainly, "You used my credit without my consent. You will pay your own." Lila did the thing beautiful people often do when cornered. She tried to cry pretty. Tears pooled and hung, photos waiting to happen. She said she'd never meant to do anything wrong. She said she thought I'd offered. She said things that sounded like apologies until you pressed on them. Then she said, with a small venom, "You wouldn't understand. This is my only wedding." I said, quiet enough to be polite and loud enough to be heard, "I understand exactly. That's why I'm insisting you own it." I left before the cake. I wanted to leave behind the way the women looked at me like I'd broken an unspoken code. In my car, I sat with my forehead on the steering wheel again, but this time, it wasn't fire. It was relief, like pulling out a splinter the length of a toothpick. The bank called the next day. The dispute was proceeding. The boutique, suddenly made of feathers, had called them in a flurry. Had I been misled? Why, yes, I said. Had I authorized the charges? No, I said. The bank representative said the boutique had a choice: return the money or produce proof. It turned out that my little emails, those ordinary lines typed late at night between dishes and sleep, were swords in daylight. The boutique manager called me personally with a voice that had lost its shine. He said, "This is all a misunderstanding." I said, "Misunderstandings usually don't come with itemized receipts." He said they would refund the charges if necessary, but wanted to resolve it amicably. I said amicable would look like me not losing sleep over a dress I hadn't purchased. In the end, they did what merchants do when cornered by the possibility of losing a battle they can't afford. They paused everything. Fittings were halted until payment was made in full by the actual buyer. My name was removed from their system, with a few keystrokes that felt like someone restoring a portrait they'd vandalized. Claire came to my apartment the evening after, carrying a bag of takeout and a face full of apology. She took one look at me and started to cry the way regular people do, messily and from the middle of themselves. I had imagined saying so many sharp things. Instead, I pulled her down to sit on the floor with me, legs crisscrossed like girls at a sleepover. She said she was sorry so many times it stopped sounding like the word. She said she should have believed me immediately. She said she'd been afraid of ruining the wedding. I said the wedding was a party, and our friendship was the thing we kept alive daily like a plant. She put her forehead against my shoulder and whispered, "Forgive me." I took a breath and said, "Okay." I meant it. I didn't mean that everything that had happened floated away. I meant I was not going to hold her under it. Lila, meanwhile, tried other tactics. She texted to say we could compromise, that she could pay me back in installments, that I was overreacting, that the boutique had misunderstood, that she hadn't lied, not exactly. When none of that landed, she turned brittle. She said I was trying to humiliate her. She said it was just a dress. She said she would never have done this if she'd known I would be so petty. I typed and deleted responses until my thumb hurt, and then I did the kindest thing I could think of, which was to say nothing. The bank did its work. The boutique adjusted to the reality of life without my quiet approval. The world shifted back into its sockets. Eventually, the day came when Lila had to walk into a place bright with mirrors and pay for her dress. I know this because the boutique manager sent me an email with one sentence: "The account has been settled by the appropriate party." The tone was neutral and tiny and looked afraid to take up space. It had a copy of the receipt attached for my records with an apology that read like someone trying not to admit they had taken a bite of the apple. At the rehearsal dinner, under lights that made the backyard look like it had stars of its own, Lila approached me. She seemed smaller, not in inches but in assumption. She came alone without the fly buzz of women around her and held her hands in front of her like she'd run out of places to put them. She said my name with no extra sugar. She said I hurt her when I did what I did. I nodded because that was true, though not in the way she meant. Then she said, "I took your generosity for granted." She said, "I acted like your patience was a credit line." She said, "I'm sorry." The words sounded a little like rocks in her mouth, but they were rocks set down. There was a flicker then of the person she could be without the performance. A nurse came up in conversation later. Someone who remembered a very different version of Lila at the clinic where she volunteered once in winter, handing out blankets and laughing with the old men. People are rarely just one thing. She was a tangle. So was I. I told her I accepted her apology and that accepting didn't erase the ledger of what had happened, but it did close the account. I told her I wanted the wedding to be lovely, because Claire deserved lovely. She held my gaze like it weighed something. She said, "Thank you," and then, in the smallest voice, she asked, "Can you forgive me?" I took a breath that tasted like lemon cake and backyard grass, and I said yes. Because forgiveness is not a gift you give to the person who hurt you, though it can feel like that. It's a way of setting down a heavy bag so you can dance. It's choosing not to carry. The bag had been heavy. I had carried it long enough. On the day of the wedding, the lake wind braided through the trees and tugged playfully at the edges of tablecloths. Claire looked like the inside of a good dream. Ethan, steady, decent Ethan, cried openly at the altar in the way that makes everyone else blink faster. When Lila walked down wearing the dress she had paid for, she held her head a little different. Not defiant, aware. I don't know if anyone else saw it, but I did. Sometimes consequences stitch us together in places we didn't know were torn. Later, after the toasts, after Claire's father said the thing that made everyone laugh, and then the thing that made all the mothers sniffle, after the first dance that looked like a slow circle you might want to live inside forever, I sat on the back step with my shoes off. My feet throbbed in that good way, the kind that says you lived your whole day fully. Claire came to slump beside me, her gown sighing around her like a content cat. She bumped her shoulder against mine. "You saved me," she said. I told her I hadn't. She said, "You saved us." I let the words sit there between us like a tiny lantern. I thought about how I'd sent the bill back. The phrase had felt like armor when I wrote it. Now it felt like a story I could tell my students one day when they were older, about knowing where your edges are and insisting other people see them. Sometimes kindness looks like saying yes. Sometimes kindness is the clean, bright line of no. My mother used to say that money shows you who people are, and then it shows you who you are. I had learned I was someone who could be generous without being a doormat. I had learned that being the kind of person who never makes a fuss was a luxury I could not afford. I could be gracious and still fight. I could be soft and still steel-strung. When the music swelled again and couples drifted back to the dance floor, I stayed on the step a minute longer, with the scent of jasmine and barbecue and the faint ozone of approaching rain. My phone buzzed. It was an email from the bank, the kind that summed everything in the blandest possible phrases. Dispute resolved, account credited. I smiled and turned off the screen, like closing a book you've carried for a long time. Eventually, in small threads, other good things followed. One of my students' parents who ran a local gallery asked to see the kids' work. We put together a show. The children wore their best shirts and tugged me over to their pieces, proud as sunflowers. The gallery smelled like paint and cookies and hope. My brother sent a photo of a certificate he'd earned, his grin wide enough to be a bridge between us across the miles. Claire called me every few days just to tell me something silly. And yes, even Lila texted me once to say she was applying for a new position at a nonprofit, of all surprises, and asked if I'd read her resume. I did. I sent back suggestions. I didn't do it because I felt I had to. I did it because it felt right. There is a difference. When I think of the boutique now, I don't see mirrors and lights and a man practicing a smile in the glass. I see a paper trail that mattered. I see a version of myself with her feet planted and her voice steady. I see the moment a promise I made in a breath, somewhere between anger and certainty, became a small act that shifted the ground under people who were sure it wouldn't move. Revenge is a word soaked in heat. What I did wasn't hot. It was cool, deliberate. It was justice handed back in the exact shape it had been taken. At school, a student asked me once why adults say sorry and then keep doing the thing. The question landed so squarely it knocked me a little off balance. I told her sometimes people think sorry is a spell that resets the world with no work. It isn't. It's a door to work. Lila had stepped through it. I had too, in my way, asking forgiveness of myself for the times I'd let my patience be mistaken for passivity. I forgave the me who had handed over a card with a shaking hand because she wanted harmony. I forgave her because she hadn't known yet what she was capable of saying out loud. If you're patient like me, you learn this slowly. The line between keeping the peace and setting yourself on fire to warm others is invisible until the moment you trip over it. The trick is to paint that line in bright chalk and point to it without apology. The first time is scary. The second is less so. After that, it becomes a game of hopscotch you can win. On the last song of the night, Claire dragged me out to the lawn where people were dancing in the kind of uncoordinated joy that bends your mouth into a real smile. Fireflies stitched gold thread through the dark. Someone laughed so hard they folded. I let my shoulders drop. I let my heart stop guarding. Claire leaned in and shouted in my ear because the music was loud and the world was forgiving. She said, "Promise me we'll still be like this when we're old." I shouted back, "I promise." Then I thought, not of the anger, not of the letters, not of the envelope with its quiet weight, but of the look on Lila's face when she came to me alone and asked for forgiveness. That was the moment I realized revenge, when done right, is less about the wound and more about teaching a lesson in a language even pride can understand. There's a picture from that night someone took without us noticing. We're blurred at the edges, all motion and light, me and Claire with our heads thrown back. Lila just a step behind us, looking like she might be about to laugh. If you squint, you can't tell what any of us are wearing. The dress is just a suggestion, a memory. The only clear things are our faces, open and alive, and the space between us, not a gulf anymore, but the length of a hand, of a step, something you can cross if you try. People tell these stories different ways. Some make me the villain for embarrassing a bride. Some make me a hero for not collapsing under the weight of other people's expectations. I'm neither. I'm the person who looked at a bill that belonged to someone else and sent it back to its rightful owner. I'm the person who stood in a small circle of light and said, "No, not mine." What came after, that was grace. That was the part you don't get to plan. That was the part I will carry with me, lighter than air. Long after the money is forgotten and the dress is folded carefully in a box, waiting for a day no one can predict. So if your phone buzzes one ordinary afternoon and a purchase you never made flashes up like a flare and you feel the floor tilt, breathe. Check your pockets for your patience. Pull out the email the world didn't expect you to keep. Say the sentence that turns the lock. Send the bill back. Pay your own. And when the dust settles and apologies find you in whatever language they can manage, let forgiveness do what it does best. Unclench your hands and make space for your life to keep going, wider and kinder than it was before. Subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts about the story in the comments. See you in the next one.